A sanction is when you want to hurt somebody in their wallet, right? That's where you hurt somebody the most, because you can stop a lot of things, but the second that you stop money from flowing in, that is where you make change. Now, what kind of sanctions are there? There are international sanctions, there are trade sanctions, there are monetary sanctions as far as offshore accounts. There are a lot of these things, okay? Now, you can do sanctions internationally or nationally. I mean, for example, Trudeau kind of did a sanction on the people in the trucking convoy, right? He froze their accounts. It's kind of like a sanction. This is something similar to what Biden is talking about. So the EU, now we already broke this down earlier about Germany. Why is it that the EU and Germany were so quiet all this time? Why didn't they say anything? Once again, we already talked about it because they are in an energy crisis. They're in an energy crunch. They're already cutting down all of their dirty energy and they're moving into clean energy, but that means they're low on energy and they get a lot of their natural gas and oil from Russia. So they've kind of been right? Why are they not announcing any sanctions on Russia as far as their exporting of energy? Well, there's the kicker, ladies and gentlemen. That is where you really hurt them. But they can't do that because the EU is reliant on them right now. So what are they going for? They are going to put strong sanctions by freezing accounts outside of the United States. In other words, what they're saying is Russia has what's called oligarchs, or what we would call CEOs and billionaires, okay? Except ours are done through corporate greed, theirs are done through killing people. So you have this giant country in Russia and you have all these oligarchs. Well, they hide their money offshore. They hide it in investments and in banks and whatnot. Now, the UK announced this morning that they were going to freeze, money from Russian oligarchs in the football clubs, okay? The soccer clubs for my US people, right? This is kind of an example of economic sanctions. Freeze their money so that they can't access it. If they can't access the money, they can't spend it, they can't do things. It is a crunch. That's what they're talking about. They're trying to do financial sanctions right now. The problem is that for a government, for a country like this, a lot of their money comes from energy exports, which we're not going after. So that's why everybody's like, bro, sanctions aren't going to do shit unless you do real sanctions. Okay? Yeah, sure, you're going to tie up these people's money, but they've got money in other countries. They've got money in China. China they're friendly with. They've got money all over the place. Okay? And this country, just to give you an idea, when Putin took over, okay, the country was right after the breakup of the USSR and the Cold War. Well, Cold War first, and then the breakup of the USSR. It was a complete shit show. It was falling apart. It's just in shit. Then, right after he took office, there was a conflict with the country of Georgia. And the Russian military was getting beat up pretty bad fighting a small country, right? Why? They didn't have radio communications with their fighter jets. They were having friendly fire. They were doing all that. So Putin did this thing where he's like, okay, we're going to rebuild everything and we're going to become more self-reliant, more isolated to the world. And so what they did is they started going into debt, but also going heavy into energy and precious metals to be an exporter, make a bunch of money. And a lot of the people that were in charge of those mines and those oil fields, they became oligarchs, they became friends, whatever. Like that. So now all of a sudden you've got all this money. Then they set up a lot of a way of how do I put this? A way of making the world reliant on them in a lot of ways. Okay, so they're not completely self-sustained, but they're still self-sustained enough to where they know that they hold the EU by the balls right now. They hold the EU by the balls. Why do you think Crimea happened and nothing happened? Because they're too reliant on them right now for a lot of reasons. Now you've got the whole Ukrainian thing going on. Obviously, Ukraine is not part of NATO, so they're not. Why that's another reason why Putin didn't mind going into this, because they're not part of NATO. So there's no actual alliance there that is required to go in and militarily support Ukraine. Everybody's kind of like, hey, Ukraine, you're on your own, but we're going to talk tough right now. Now, I'm not shitting on the president or the administration in any way. Obviously, that speech right there was a complete disaster. Okay, that was a complete disaster. I think the biggest non-answer was, why not impose these sanctions on him now? He's already crossed your red line 3 times over. Why aren't you doing it now? And he just ignored it. That was the worst look of the whole thing. Even if he would have just said something, said along the lines of, because we'll do it when we're ready. That would have been a better answer than a no answer. The world looks to this and looks to the United States as the beacon of strength or whatnot. Now, does that mean that this is weakness and this is just going to compel Putin to continue to do the invasion? No, not necessarily. Now, remember, the word invasion is also depending on where you're looking at it from, right? Because Russia is claiming they're not invading, they're not trying to take over any territory, they're just going in and doing peacekeeping or supporting or whatever. And there's a lot of geopolitical problems here. Because remember, when Russia broke up from the USSR, a lot of these Balkan and Eastern European states were once part of Russia. And so a lot of that population still lives there. And they get a lot more support from Russia than they do from the EU. So it's not like everybody in those countries feels like they're being invaded. Some of them are like, hell yeah, come on in. And then you get sanctions from the US where they're like, hey, you know this part of Ukraine that they're the separatist regions? We're going to cut off all financial ties to them. Well, that just gives these guys a real big, hey, I'll come in and be your savior. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's look at this from a global scale. What sanctions could we put in place that would actually hurt them? The biggest one right now, outside of any kind of military, response, would be to cut off all exports to any country that is friendly with the United States and basically look at them and say, hey, you're not taking anything from them. That would cripple them. But that's not going to happen. And so you're saying to yourself, well, then how come we don't just move troops in there and kind of say, hey, let's do our own peacekeeping mission? Because once again, Ukraine's not part of NATO. So it becomes a very muddled, cloudy, political, almost landmine when you're trying to play this out. Now, they're trying to get Ukraine to join NATO, and that's what Putin's saying. He's like, hey, you guys are just trying to encroach on our space. You can't do that. And the U.S. is like, well, they're a free country. They can do what they want. And then it got so bad that the president of Ukraine, who was a comedian who played the president on TV one time, basically set out and said, you know what, maybe we don't want to join NATO. So it's not so cut and dry. It's not this cut and dry, they're in our neighbor and we have to defend our neighbor. There's so many other things going on. And I'm not trying to make light of the situation or try to say anyone, who's right, who's wrong. Obviously, I think that, invading into a country is wrong. But the hard part about doing this, and I know this is gonna piss some of you guys off, and that's okay. I'm just telling you guys how things work in the world, and historically speaking, there's this thing called displacement, right? And this is why it becomes such a muddled thing in that area. Something similar has happened in Ukraine. And that is when it got split up, there was a lot of people that were loyal or are loyal or identify as more Russian that are in that area. And that is why you're seeing the ability for them to move in without heavy resistance. Now that I've got that out of the way, this is where it changes. Once military operations that are no longer considered peacekeeping or regional start spreading to other areas of a sovereign nation, that is when you have what is considered aggression, war, invasion, right? So if this is Ukraine and this is the separatist regions and Russia has moved troops in for peacekeeping, but now all of a sudden military targets are attacked within the sovereign nation, that is when shit is completely different. And that is what we're watching right now. So this is what the world's watching. They're kind of like, hey, stop doing what you're doing. We're gonna punish you. We're gonna punish you. But once it moves into a sovereign nation, then other nations have to decide what the move is. If this was, a NATO country, it would be game over, right? It'd be game over because they have to defend each other. But Ukraine is not part of that. So in the military alliance, it changes things. There's other things at play as well. We talked about oil. We talked about Bahrain and Qatar being the potential lifelines for the EU to get gas and natural gas, or oil and natural gas, to them instead of relying on Russia. However, they already have pacts with the East, and so there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on right now. All right. Now, one thing Biden did say is that they're going to release more oil into the market to bring down gas prices, hopefully. But the problem is that there's several things that are playing against it right now, and that's gas prices. And that is, not only do you have this uncertainty and this fuel crunch right now, but you also have inflation going wild as well. Okay, it's Qatar. Sorry, I'm sorry. Okay, there you go. Sorry, Qatar. I know some of you guys don't like the word Qatar. That's another thing in place. There's so much more to go over because I could go all the way back to the fucking World War II and the split and then the Red Scare, and there's a lot of history here. It's not as simple as everybody thinks. Does this mean I'm excusing what's happening over there? Absolutely not. I'm just trying to give you guys a geopolitical context where it's not Russia good or Russia bad or communism bad or good or capitalism. No, it's not as simple as everyone thinks. And the world is so much more connected than it once was. Now, when you guys start saying, is this going to be World War III? No, we're not launching nukes, okay? We're not going to have a nuclear war. That's called self-preservation, all right? You're not going to launch a nuke knowing that a whole world is going to send nukes at you. It's pointless. It's mute, right? You don't gain anything from it. But financial Cold War is something that could happen. I'm not saying we're there. We're not even close to that yet, but this could happen. Why do I say this? Remember when I said the world is so interconnected? For example, the world trades oil on the petrodollar, and you've got energy moving, you've got gold, you've got precious metals, you've got currencies, you've got exchanges, you've got everything. Imports, exports. This is my concern right now. Sure, cybersecurity attacks are what I'm watching right now, and that's why I like cybersecurity stocks right now. I'm heavy in PANW. I told you guys last year I think that cybersecurity is going to be the biggest sector this year, and I still believe that. And cybersecurity is going to be huge because that's the way you do it. I mean, if you wanted to shut down a country, you don't send a nuke. You shut down their power grid. That's how you do it. But cybersecurity is going to be huge, but it's going to come down to a financial Cold War. If, in fact, Russia and China somehow packed up on a us against the world in the financial, network of the world, then we've got problems. Because remember, Russia, when it comes to precious metals and energy, and China, when it comes to production and manufacturing, if these things disappear, whether their own choice or from the rest of the world's choice, that's where we have a big problem. Now, I know that Russia and China aren't as friendly as they used to be, but that could change at any moment. And that's what I'm going to keep an eye on. Now, we've already heard, the potential for China to do some more aggressive moves with Taiwan, the whole 9 yards. But I think Biden, or at least the administration, is kind of trying to avoid that and isolate Russia. And I'll tell you why. If you guys were in the call this morning, you'll remember, and we talked about something that the Department of Justice did, and that is they reversed the Trump-era sanctions on China and the trade. If you remember, there was some really tough sanctions that went on China. There was also some trade deals where they were required to buy a certain amount of $80 billion, whatever it was, in agriculture, and that they were getting hit with tariffs, the whole 9 yards. That got reversed, which is kind of convenient with the timing. They're saying that's because they want to open up more, easier trade because of XYZ, but it could be potentially also to throw an olive branch out there. Now, if China says, hey, this is all going on and we will use this as an excuse to start moving, be more aggressive towards Taiwan, that could change things. But the last time they got aggressive towards Taiwan, the U.S. government kind of backed off. A lot of you guys are saying, Stocky, you were talking about this during the election. Yes, I did, and I think a lot of people mistook it as me being politically leaning in my outlook, rather than using historical precedents. Now, we talked about this heading up to the election, and we said, if Dems win, keep an eye out on Russia to make some moves next year. Something we said back in 2020. The reason that we said this was that historical precedence is that when Democrats are in office, we end up seeing what we call belligerents start to flex up a little bit more. Okay, it happened during Clinton. We saw that with Kosovo, and we saw that with the Balkans, and we saw that with that, and then with Biden or with Obama, we saw Crimea, and then now we're seeing this. This is not saying that Dems are weak. That's not what I was trying to say. I was saying looking at historical precedents. I mean, look at Jimmy Carter, right? Iran and the hostage situation, right? Like, this is something that often happens. And so this is something we were kind of expecting. Now, the problem for me is, unfortunately, and it's not an attack on his character or his leadership ability, but Biden doesn't give off strength. Obama gave off strength, right? He gave off that leadership, that ability to whatever, as far as a Democrat in office. Biden doesn't have that. And so when we saw today during the speech is kind of one of those things where you're like, answer the question, give me some straight answers and stuff like that. So that is something that we're going to see. And I don't know if this is going to lead to allies going like, oh shit, or not. One thing we saw today is that the Russian stock market dropped by 45%. 45%. That was insane. The U.S. market is still holding up somewhat, okay? Is it going to last? I don't know. I'm betting against it right now today because I feel like it's a little bit dip, but I'm still buying dips of stocks on the way up because this market is not done selling off, I don't think. I don't think. I think there's just, even with this 15% pullback, and we're almost moving into bear market territory, we are already on the Russell and almost on the NASDAQ. There's still a lot of other stuff going on. You've got Russia, the conflict, you have the Fed, the rate hikes, the unknowns there, you have inflation going crazy. This is just not a good time for economies. But if you saw on my Twitter today, I posted a thing about historical precedents as well. Once again, just giving you guys the historical precedents. Every time we had an international conflict, we saw a dive on the initial invasions and whatever, until everybody kind of got an idea of who's on whose sides and what we're looking at. And then the market did this. It happened in Vietnam. We saw it with Gulf War. We saw it with Crimea. We saw it with Iraq, Afghanistan. We saw a bleed off, and then we saw. Now, the difference, though, this time is that we didn't have what we had now, which is 0% interest rates, inflation running wild. And once again, unemployment. I'm sorry, guys. I don't care what the government tells you. Unemployment is not 2 to 3, 4%, okay? Unemployment is conveniently counted only by people who are out of work and are actively looking for jobs. There was 4 to 4.5 million people every single month from the month of April until July or January of this year that have walked away from the workforce. Some of them gone into early retirement. Some of them just stopped working. There is over 10 million people not working right now. All right. Now, the reason for that, whether it's because people are tired of bad working conditions, whether it's because people are sick, whether it's because people are whatever, it's not, once again, that's the political side of it. I'm just giving you the numbers. Does that mean hold your money in cash in your mattress? No. Does it mean put all of it in the market? Probably not. But I have cash on the side, and every dip I'm buying a little bit more because you know what? Like I told you guys in 2008 after the stock market crash, there's some guy out there who waited forever, finally bought, and then guess what? 6 months later, he was down 40%, and everybody laughed at him. But you know something? He's up 125% today, and everyone else's money is down 80%. I will give you guys this number one more time. Why it's so important to understand. With inflation over the past 20 years, not including this 7% we had this year. In 2000, the average home price was $149,000. Today, the average home price, as of last year, $463,000. If you had $149,000 in the bank, you still have $149,000. What do I think about gold prices? I think gold is going to continue up. I think it's pulling back right now on a little bit of yeah, all right, good, sanctions. Blah, blah, blah. I think gold's going to continue to move up because once again, even if the Russian, which is already going crazy, but if the Russian invasion, let's say it just stops, we still have to worry about stagflation. And I did an entire YouTube video on it if you guys want to check out what we're talking about. The last time we had a sustained stagflation, gold outpaced the S&P by 30%. So I think that gold is going to move back over 2,000 again. Now, we've been playing it since it was 1,700 an ounce. Could there be a gold sell-off by Russia to finance the war amidst sanctions? I mean, it could be, but what are they going to sell it off for if there's so many sanctions, unless they're selling it like basically... I mean, gold is what they have, you know. I mean, that's what they have. I mean, are they going to dump it all into the market? Probably not. I mean, they've still got oil.